Hello, everybody. My name is Ben, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Alberta separatism. Now, separatism has been pretty big news lately, and separatists as a whole have kind of dominated the media landscape, at least here in Alberta. Sadly, I'm not talking about the Confederacy of Independent Systems, though that would be pretty rad if we were all getting battle droid pilled. But at least for the time being, we've got to talk about the annoying chuds who want to separate Alberta from our great nation of Canada. It's been really blowing up recently, especially with a visit by the Alberta Treaty Chiefs to the legislature, where they basically let the Conservative MLAs have it. I actually had the privilege to be there at the same time as the Chiefs. It was very, I guess, empowering, very gratifying. During the same visit to the legislature, personally, I got to see our provincial NDP constantly, like repeatedly. They made repeated efforts asking the Conservative MLAs to officially denounce the separatist movement. And you know what they did? They would stand up during question period and look the NDP dead in the eyes and basically say, but if we did that, think of the consequences, right? It was like pulling teeth trying to get them to answer the question directly if they did or did not support the separatist movement here in Alberta. And they obviously do, because they lowered the requirements, first of all, the petition signature requirements to have a petition go to a referendum provincially from what was about 660,000 down to 178,000. So massively cut the threshold needed to bring the separatist petition up to a referendum. And this happened immediately before the separatists put their petition through. Additionally, back around the same time, the separatist petition got shot down by Elections Alberta for being unconstitutional and basically being illegal. And our illustrious Conservative government responded by essentially saying Elections Alberta and courts can no longer decide on the legitimacy of a referendum question. So altogether, not a great choice, and they're obviously using it to support the separatist movement at every possible turn. And then, of course, we had the separatist group that went down to the States and they met with people from the American government. And while officially it wasn't anybody super important, it was just like staffers, they're obviously trying to sort of get official commitments from the American government to support Alberta if we were to separate, which also kind of supports the idea that this is not a grassroots movement at all. And I think a lot of people are seeing that more and more, where the separatist movement is very obviously funded by the American government. We're seeing a lot about Alberta joining the United States compared to like the proportionate representation in the population that wants that sort of thing to happen. Like in Alberta, it's about 20% of people are in favor of separation, and less than half of those people are in favor of joining the United States. But America's kind of dominated the conversation a lot of the time. It's been great. And I mean, you look at like Twitter and all the Twitter accounts that are pro Alberta separation, or at least more of them than there should be, are based in like Israel and Pakistan and the United States of America, which is obviously the sign of a movement that is completely homegrown. So, you know, we may be headed for a color revolution, and shall we say, it will become color spelt without a U. But in any case, back to the Chiefs. The Alberta Association of Treaty Chiefs held a vote on basically the confidence in the government of Alberta, like the current Conservative government. And it was a unanimous vote of non-confidence. So that's pretty great, and I think a lot of us can agree with them on this in particular. And their main point of contention, or of concern, is that the current government refuses to denounce separatism, and seeing as how all the treaties are made with the Crown, so like the federal government, they would be technically invalid if Alberta were to separate. So that's a big point of concern for the Indigenous community, of course, right? And rightfully so, but it's definitely not a good thing for anyone outside of the Indigenous community as well. I'll take you through some of their more specific points in a second, but a separate Alberta is very well established to be just not at all viable. It's a ridiculous idea, and we need to shut this down wherever we see it popping up. Alberta separatism goes way back. It started back in like the 30s with what was called at the time the Alberta Social Credit Party, which was our government. And that's, first of all, very funny to me that Alberta has had a social credit party and that we like to try and claim that China has a social credit system. But we had our own homegrown movement to implement a social credit system. Of course, that was actually one of the few times that the federal government has stepped in and said, no, this is insane. You're not allowed to do this. But back then, the Social Credit Party had a lot of its elements that were separatist. It was during the Great Depression. People were not very happy with the way the federal government was running things, so they figured that they should try to, strike out on their own. And they shot down that movement back then by basically just ridiculing anyone who believed in it. And I think we need to bring that back. Make everyone know that if you're a separatist, you are an idiot. You are a moron. You are part of the unwashed masses who can barely fucking form a coherent thought. I mean, it's worked well in the past, right? It worked back then. It can work now. And we need to really get ahead of this because there is like a not zero chance that if this does go to referendum, and the deadline for that is in May, and the vote comes back in a way that does not favor separatism, then we could see angling from both our government and the American government alleging stuff like election fraud and setting it up so that there might be, I guess, a justification for a bit more direct government interference to promote separatism. So, love them or hate them, the Separatists are tremendously talented comedic writers. And I don't think it's entirely intentional. But some of the reading on this page from the Alberta Prosperity Project, so these are the guys who are at least the Alberta-based proponents, the major backers of separatism here in Alberta. They're like the think tank, if you want to call it that, that's responsible for a lot of the movement. They have this fantastic page on what does Alberta sovereignty mean, and I just have to take you through some of the highlights because it really makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside when I see this. And I feel like it's valuable to go through your ideological enemies' talking points and just sort of categorically talk about how they are absolutely batshit insane. So, I mean, of course, there's a lot to go over. It's very poorly formatted, which is sort of, I guess, nitpicky of me. They have it divided into these 4 categories, but everything kind of overlaps, and a lot of it is really just about deregulating oil companies, but whatever, it doesn't matter. So yeah, we'll just go through it real quick here and show you the highlights. And of course, it starts off incredibly strong. So at the very beginning here, we have sort of a little preamble. The most significant thing is that they provide a source, like hyperlinked, right? We click on this, it takes us to the Webster's Dictionary and the definition for sovereignty, right? Like, fantastic. That's exactly what we're looking for. I love it. I love it when they provide sources for stuff. I mean, to be fair, the Merriam-Webster's Dictionary is not, like, I don't think I would contest the definition of sovereignty, but whatever, they want it to be thorough. This is important because they don't provide a single source in the entire rest of this article. They make a just dizzying amount of claims and provide a source for exactly 0 of them. So this is the biggest section, kind of by far. Of course, there's the obligatory hatred of equalization payments, which always funny. Like, we're very talented at making a lot of money because we have all the oil, so we're producing a lot of economic output, which, but we're also always first in line when there's money that can come to us, unless it's for healthcare, because we have the ability to have a lot of federal funding for healthcare, including like dental care, like the federal dental program. But Danielle Smith said she didn't want it unless she could use it for whatever she wants. So just keep that in mind whenever you're thinking about federal funding going to the wrong places. It could be coming here, but our government doesn't want it. And so they have a lot of critiques in here about basically anyone with the last name Trudeau, but specifically like Pierre Trudeau. He comes up a lot. And they talk about stuff that's, in the most charitable interpretation, they talk about the underrepresentation of the province of Alberta's interests in the federal government compared to places like Quebec, which are more voter profitable, if you want to call it that. They win a lot more seats out there. You can win the federal government with just Eastern Canada. That is true. So this, I guess, just presents a really great argument for ending the first past the post electoral system, hopefully transitioning to a proportional representation system where, our votes out here in the West actually count for something. I would like that too, as someone who does not vote for the pastiest white man up on stage every single time. So we get to the first one that really resonates with me. So the loss of over $200 billion in investment planned for Alberta subsequent to 2006 due to unreasonably restrictive federal regulatory policies, which via the multiplier effect has likely cost Alberta more than $1 trillion of increased economic activity, which would have significantly benefited both Alberta and all of Canada. This one is the first appearance of the multiplier effect. It does appear again later on, but for those of you who don't know what the multiplier effect is, it's a macroeconomic term for investment in an economy where the investment causes GDP growth larger than the investment. So, say the federal government does invest $200 billion into some project in Alberta, then you could reasonably see it produce more than $200 billion in GDP growth. But either way, they do not provide a source for where they're getting this $200 billion of investment that was planned subsequent to 2006. They give no indication whatsoever of how they arrive at $1 trillion of lost economic activity. And the multiplier effect being 5 times is astronomically high. This kind of exemplifies everything that's wrong with the rest of this article. They also say that they're against illegitimate or odious debt borrowed by the federal government, not for the benefit of the people of Alberta or Canada. And they give a few examples of things that money could be used for, like foreign NGOs, other countries, dictators, terrorist groups, and foundations. But they also don't give an example of it happening. I mean, don't get me wrong, we probably have some kind of money that's going to terrorist groups. I think I remember one terrorist group that we actually recently voted on sending money to. And what was it called? Oh yeah, the IDF, the most moral democracy in the world, Israel, our favorite allies in the Middle East. I mean, yeah, I'm also against sending them money. And for the record, every single conservative politician in the federal government voted to continue sending weapons to Israel. One of the only holdouts in Alberta was Heather McPherson, who is an NDP leadership candidate. Just given the general separatists' voting record, it's obviously they're not talking about Israel. Then we get down to, I guess, the real deregulation of oil companies. Their governance and legislation factors are very interesting. So the first two are them bitching and moaning about 2 things that restrict the flow of oil. The first one is the restrictive bill C-69, or the Impact Assessment Act. So under the summary for the Impact Assessment Act, names the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada as the authority responsible for impact assessments. Seems reasonable. And provides for a process for assessing the environmental, health, social, and economic effects of designated projects with a view to preventing certain adverse effects and fostering sustainability. Yeah, you're right. We should get rid of that. It sounds like adverse effects are they're trying to prevent adverse effects. Kind of funny how that gets in the way of oil production. Maybe we should consider alternatives, is all I'm saying. I guess maybe that's unpatriotic of me. And then their second in this list is the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act, which bans oil tankers carrying more than 12,500 metric tons of crude oil from docking along British Columbia's north coast. The north coast of British Columbia is like incredibly dangerous, and makes tankers incredibly prone to spills and massive environmental disasters. Generally, they don't want like catastrophic oil spill in the ocean. Also, we don't have a pipeline to BC's north coast anyways. It's been made very clear that there is no group other than the Alberta government that is going to, well, I guess, and the federal government that are going to cooperate to get this done, because Indigenous groups are against it. The BC government is against it. There is no way that we are going to get a pipeline built to there. So kind of a moot point, really. They did not update the website since Carney came into power and got rid of the carbon tax. They claim that they have an inability, this of course due to the federal government, to market Albertan oil to other markets. And again, they like the multiplier effect, which costs Alberta at least $25 billion annually. Again, no source. I mean, I would appreciate, again, a justification for how they got to the 5 times multiplier effect twice. It's interesting how they're both exactly 5 times as well. They didn't want to shake it up or anything. Yeah, that's definitely a number that they didn't just pull out of their ass. The federal government's plan to phase out Alberta oil and gas by 2050 while importing foreign oil from countries with lower environmental standards and social values. I mean, yeah, you're right. We should just not import oil at all. We should just stop. And we should stop using it as soon as is reasonably possible. They're also very upset that the federal government doesn't acknowledge that Alberta's oil and gas industry is like, just, it's so important. They need it for everything. We need it. They need us for everything, and they don't even acknowledge it. They don't say that we're important. They're not making me feel very special. Okay. So that's interesting, I guess. I think it's very funny that they're all just very whiny. And then, I mean, if you know me, you know my opinions on this one. But they do not like the Canada Health Act, which interferes with Alberta's authority over healthcare as provided in the Constitution and prevents creative solutions to improve access, quality, and cost. They also say that the Canadian healthcare system now functions in the lowest quartile of quality at the highest quartile of cost. I think that is like kind of true, but it's among like the top 16 developed countries that have universal health care. And if I recall correctly from the making of my video on healthcare, we are substantially above the American private system in pretty much every way. But whatever. I like the preventing creative solutions. I think that's an interesting way of describing charging money for medical services. That's very creative. It's never been tried before. I'm sure it'll go great. Then we get down to cultural and identity factors. They kind of come out of the gate swinging. Some examples of cultural grievances include the federal control and oppression of Alberta's Indigenous citizens as evidenced by unresolved historical grievances as well as the Indian Act. I mean, I agree completely, but as we've seen, especially in the last couple weeks, the Separatists do not actually care about Indigenous people. And to be completely real with you, the federal Liberals don't. The provincial NDP doesn't necessarily. No branch of government really fucks with Indigenous people. The current NDP leadership race has the first Indigenous person to ever be on a federal leadership ballot, which is crazy. So shout out to Tennille Johnson. She's dope. She's my goat. Well, one of my many goats in that race. It's very cool that that's happening. Very sad that that's the first one. Very cool nonetheless. So they have a bone to pick with the Official Languages Act because they don't like that Pierre Trudeau imposed the cost of bilingualism, which is really funny because I don't know what they're talking about when they say cost of bilingualism, other than maybe in the most charitable interpretation, like the fact that some products are theoretically more expensive because it costs more money to run a second production line for labeling that's like bilingual. but I don't know. I don't know. I don't think bilingualism really affects many of us in our day-to-day lives. Like a somewhat valid gripe that they have is that they made it more difficult for people who aren't bilingual to work for the federal government, and like the federal government is one of the best employers in the country, which yes, it is sad that people are discriminated against in some way based on the number of languages they know. It doesn't prevent federal government employment. It just makes it easier for you to get a job if you can also speak French. But these are actually some of my favorite points, where they say the federal government's unilateral decision to change Canada to a socialist slash Marxist post-national state without consultation with the provinces and or the people of Canada. If there's one thing I can say about Mr. Marx Carney, it's that he is no socialist, okay? And Justin Trudeau was not a socialist, and Stephen Harper was not a socialist, and nowhere even near. The closest thing that we've had to a socialist is Justin Trudeau, but that's just because he's Fidel Castro's illegitimate son and not ideologically socialist. And they're also afraid that the federal government is going to relinquish the sovereignty of Canada to an unelected supranational organization slash community, aka the United Nations. Just to be clear, this is not, and I repeat, not somebody's psychotic delusion. This is something that's happening for sure. It's happening. Don't laugh. It's happening. Okay? This is very important to somebody who's going through a tough time with their mental health. The federal government's support of wokeness, need I say more? In the final section, we get hit with some good old-fashioned COVID denial. So, using a questionable public health crisis to infringe on basic constitutional freedoms. So, very funny that they say a questionable public health crisis. Disappointing, but very funny. The federal government's plan to eliminate the right to self-defense, including the right to use whatever force is available to defend life, liberty, and property, and the right to own and bear arms. We don't have the right to bear arms in Canada. This is another indication that this is definitely American-backed, because Canada never has had the right to bear arms, so the federal government can't eliminate that because we've never had it. We can own a gun. I have a gun license. I can purchase a gun. I just can't purchase a really big gun, you know? I guess there is that one anti-material rifle that you can buy, or that you can like legally own, I think still. I'm not sure if it's the case anymore, but at one point you could own one anti-material rifle because it was Canadian manufactured, which is very interesting. But then, of course, the life, liberty, and property, that's very American sounding. And then last but not least, the elimination of the supremacy of God is a big hot button issue for them. So I can't. I have no clue what they're talking about. The whole thing would be made much easier if they were to just provide sources. Just provide sources for like anything. Then I could, actually dig into it and see like what they're trying to convey, but they do not. I just can't. There's only so much time in the day that I can spend thinking about this. And while it's incredibly funny, incredibly entertaining, it brings a smile to my face every single time I explore this beautiful political mosaic that we have here in Canada. These guys are just insane. And so with that, I mean, that's all I got for you today. I hope you found this entertaining. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about, shall we say, the less mentally well individuals in our beautiful, great nation. As always, if you have any suggestions, questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to hit me up in the comments. And if you're still with me, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Have a good day.